I'm going to talk a little bit about a narcissistic family cult. In my experience of trying to figure out what had happened to me for the last several years, I struggled a little bit because typically what I find on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok is stuff with a narcissistic spouse or boyfriend. And whereas I have talked about and I will talk about how I do believe that my husband has narcissistic traits from his narcissistic upbringing, I do not identify with the things that talk about a narcissistic spouse. So I'm going to talk to you more about what I have found both in therapy, in reading, etc., on a narcissistic family cult, just because there seems to be a bit of a paucity of literature on this. So a narcissistic family cult is a highly dysfunctional group of people. Within that group will be kind of the matriarch, patriarch abuser. There will also be kind of sub-abusers who are, we'll talk about as flying monkeys in future or whatever. And then there's also the enablers, the people who enable the behavior. And then of course there are the victims. Within this very dysfunctional and unstable unit, there are rules that you are expected to follow, to adhere to, ways of life that you have to adhere to. And if you do not do that, there is punishment, whether it's mental, emotional, verbal, can even go as far as being physical. The reason for the punishment is to inflict emotional damage on the victim, to get them to give up on their self through manipulation, through coercive control. You will question yourself to the point where you are pretty certain that you are crazy. You yourself are crazy as the victim, and you are the one that needs help. Through this control, a victim will submit and accept the false facade, the false vision of what the family is trying to put out as what they are into the world. And through this coercive control and accepting of it, you as the victim become trauma bonded to the cult. So I'm going to read a bit about a trauma bond. It will be more eloquent than what I can say. So a trauma bond is the type of emotional attachment that forms between abusers and victims. This type of bond describes the attachment between narcissistic parents and their children, and these attachments can maintain beyond childhood and into adulthood, which was absolutely the case in my scenario. The hallmark traits that identify trauma bonds include an imbalance of power between the parent and the child, a confusing experience for the child, in that they are grateful for the parent's positive attention, but also feel responsible for and deserving of blame for any negative attention or emotion from the parents. Their self-esteem is shaped through their parents. So in yesterday's episode, I talked about my experiences with a narcissistic family cult. Talked about just basically what the definition is, kind of that there are, of course, the abusers, the enablers, and the victim, and then kind of briefly explained about how trauma bonding can disguise to you what seems so obvious as getting out and calling out the behavior. So today I'm going to talk a little bit more, go into a little more depth, may continue as the days go on. So obviously the narcissistic family cult is going to consist overall of a patriarch or a matriarch as the leader. In my case, it was the matriarch. She ruled with an iron fist. You had to follow her requirements for holidays, requirements for weekends. This is how birthdays are done. If it's not me there at the birthday with the birthday cake, then the birthday did not even exist. And if you questioned that, you were punished in the form of belittling, little side comments, just other behavior to make you feel like you were the asshole for not adhering to the cult-like rules. Typically, the matriarch, patriarch, again, matriarch in my case, is extremely self-centered. They are never wrong, and all of the followers must blindly be obedient to them or else. Whether it's just for the sake of the matriarch abuser or other abusers and enablers inside that narcissistic family cult, you must totally agree to the belief system that they have, turn a blind eye to any of the sadistic behavior that not only happens to you, but also happens to others in society. and how they can seduce and then abuse others. You have to kind of turn a blind eye to it. Their false sense of power is crucial to the cult's existence and is obviously at the forefront of all of their interactions. So if you're like, what possibly could sadistic behavior be? Of pillars of society, as I've referred to them as, and have no fear, I am here to tell you some of the examples of times that out in society, not just under the roof of where I was, I saw this sadistic behavior. So this might end up being two parts. So since I lived, as stated in other videos, for the last 16 years, it has always been my husband and boyfriend at the time and I that have lived the closest in proximity. So as such, we have been the ones that hang out the most often with my mother-in-law and my father-in-law before he died. And so we typically saw this abuse of others. Part two, look at part one. Sort of part. So we typically I saw this sadistic abuse of others when we would go out in public with my mother-in-law and my father-in-law. So she was just the most amazing, wonderful, wonderful woman in other scenarios that were outside the house where I would see her. Amazing in church, amazing in places like that, amazing at holiday gatherings. But when we were around service type people, so waitresses, any sort of like movie theater staff, like airline attendants, just any service industry type thing, she was a fucking bitch. And it's like embarrassing because I guess like the cult stuff says, I would sort of like be mortified in the moment that it's happening, sort of be like, surely is this happening? Surely, is this fucking happening? And so it's like weird because now that I process all this stuff later, it's like, I do have a sense of like shame and guilt that I didn't say things in the moment, like chill out, mother-in-law. But anyway, for the sake of what I'm going through. So waitresses, where we were seated was too loud. She needed the TV off or a different channel. Even if we were at like a sports bar and we had like nieces and nephews with us, we needed to change it to something cartoony or turn off the movie that's on. At the bank, the lights are too bright. Can you turn down the lighting? And the bank officer would be like, I don't control the lights in the place, lady. Again, airline, just anybody's service type, it's like she would become a different person. If there was a booth at like a fairground, for example, the NRA booth at the fairground, totally had a meltdown, like yelled and just bleh, like to this poor person at this booth. Like, who are you? And then one of the worst in my memory that is when I really knew that something had to change is on Christmas Eve at a Minneapolis mall. We went to see Santa with my also narcissistic, self-centered sister-in-law and her narcissistic, self-centered husband and their children. And man, did my mother-in-law and my sister-in-law and brother, man, they really wanted their kids to see Santa. And long story short, because I think I'm already running out of time, because we got there on Christmas Eve afternoon, the Santa had already like ended. Hours were over because people wanted to go and spend time with their families. Can you imagine the empathy of like realizing that other service people need to be with their families? Anyway, and so since I'm really running out of time, we like required the Santa and all of the staff to open back up just for us. I stood there and let it happen like a total cult. So continuing on a bit, I've talked about what the broad definitions of a narcissistic family cult are, and ways in which I noticed that they also could be abusive to people in the outside world, even though generally putting on a good face. So today I'll briefly talk about how they can kind of get you. So obviously if you are born into the narcissistic family cult, there you are, you're born into it. And I'll maybe talk later about how children born to a narcissist or narcissists will either themselves become a narcissist, and or there can also be something called lost child, forgotten child. This is typically a child who identifies from an early age that something does feel wrong with mom and or dad, which my husband says that he has memories as early as age 5 of feeling like something just wasn't right, he does fit a lot of the traits of the lost child, forgotten child, in that they spend a lot of time outside. They try to remove themselves from the scenario of the parent. As for how someone like me, who is not born specifically into this cult, is that originally when you meet them, they will come across as very welcoming, very loving. They want to know everything about you, everything about your family, what you're interested in, your jobs. They really want to know weaknesses about you. If you have any like mental health issues, what are things that you don't like? What are pet peeves that you have? Obviously, in hindsight, it makes complete sense why they wanted to know those things, because as I'll probably talk about in the future, they absolutely then used those against me, held them over me, pointed out ways in that my borderline personality disorder, my eating disorders, my insecurities made me less than the best mom and wife that I could be for their son/brother. And through that sharing of information, I said that they'll obviously use it against you. So a red flag that typically is missed in the beginning, though my gut was trying to warn me, is that they shun individuality and boundaries. If you are seen as kind of being abrasive or having a belief or a boundary that the rest of the family does not share, that is heavily discouraged. So I'm going to read this next statement from a resource that I've been using through my therapist. So at the beginning, they will want to know who your friends are. Yes. Your family history. Yes. Interests. Yes. What you do with your day. Yes. Your workplace, even as far as your primary care provider. I can attest that this is true, not for my primary care provider, but constantly wanted to know if my daughters were up to date on their shots, where they were going, even asked to come with me sometimes to those appointments. Continuing on. So with the narcissistic family cult, you are constantly questioned on what you're doing, with who, and why. You are not able to keep anything away from the cult because they are entitled to know everything about your life. And this entitlement is disguised as loving care about you. They are, in a sense, they will charm you with these words of love, like, this is, we just want to know all of this stuff about you because we love you and we want to support you. But ultimately, if it's just to have control over your life and to make it feel as if they exist to remind you that your driver's license is going to expire. That's why they needed to know the date, because implying in a sense that you will forget that if they are not there for you, thus kind of creating a trauma bond, if you will, with them. In that they're kind of insulting you in a sense that you can't be trusted with that information, with that responsibility, but it's disguised as, well, I love you, and so I'm going to make sure that everything in your life is okay. And so the means with which they must always have information is, again, disguised as caring about you. Also, with them constantly doing this, it's going to normalize that this is okay, that they know everything about you. I now have been no contact with the 5 abusive in-laws in my family for, in a few days, it will be 4 weeks, which feels like barely time has passed at all in regards to 16 years. At the same time, it feels like such a head clearing of, why didn't I see this as bizarre? Why did it seem like when I was trying to pull back from it, why did it feel like I was absolutely like blaspheming God, if you will, which I guess when you think about me going against the cult mindset of the matriarch cult leader, it was blasphemous. And so subversively, this way to know everything about you is, it's kind of to let you know that you as the victim, ultimately the matriarch and her flying monkeys enablers have ultimate control over you and the workings of your life. So again, I'm going to read a little bit from a resource that is more eloquent than what I can speak to. So The cult members will call the shots and make decisions that govern your life. Absolutely. It almost felt like, again, I know I'm a human, but when you are in that cult mindset of coercive control, it's like you have no control over, oh, you're coming down this weekend. Oh, that's where we're going on vacation. Oh, that's what we're doing for my birthday. That's what we're doing. And so it goes on this for years and years. Again, I went through this for 16 years before, just in like the last 2 months, I finally realized, as it got worse and worse and worse, that something was wrong, even though I'd been made to feel like the crazy one, and ultimately it was me. It, I guess in my case, got so bad that I couldn't disguise anymore. I couldn't lie to myself anymore that it was normal. And so in this way, cult members, like the members of the narcissistic family cult, will suffer in silence through the constant intrusive attack on their lives. I would tell my husband that it felt like his mom, his sisters, and their husbands lived with us. It felt like they lived here because of how much we had to have contact, phone calls. So I'm going to vent about group chats a little bit and why I think that group chats are really, really harmful. So first of all, it's quite obvious, but our parents, when they were raising us, didn't have to have group chats. Like, obviously my mom didn't have a group chat going with her mom as she raised me because cell phones didn't exist. Email didn't exist. And so we suddenly have this society that thinks, well, we have phones and we have ways to communicate. And so why wouldn't we have group chats? Of course we would have group chats. And so suddenly we have all of these people, I'm assuming it's not just me, who are kind of required. Your in-laws, your maybe mother-in-law is maybe your own family, feels entitled to know what's going on in your life. So we have these group chats that are just open with multiple members. And in the case of mine, sometimes just from my mother-in-law, there would be 60 texts a day. Up to 60 was probably the worst that it would get. And then you have it coming in from others and you feel a pressure to respond. Yet if you don't respond, then there's a guilt. You might get a side text, which I would get in my case of kind of like, you should respond to that. Or, oh, you didn't. I actually got one once that you shouldn't have responded to that like you did. That probably hurt so-and-so. And so then you have like side coercive control of you didn't react the right way or often enough, or you'd get direct questions because you aren't supplying narcissists, you aren't giving them the supply that they need, the information that they need to maintain that control over your life. So I think get out of group chats if you're in them. Group chats are okay. If there's, in my opinion, if there's like an end goal we're going on vacation maybe. And so it's just easier to have a group chat so that we can all stay on the same page with what we're doing. But as far as group chats that just kind of exist so that people can control each other's lives, I don't believe in them.